Have you ever wondered why some people seem so easy to get along with and others require a much more conscious effort? Hi, I'm Abby Donnelly, and today we're going to be talking about personality tests in hiring and retention of staff. So let me start by telling you a little bit about me. So my company is called the Leadership and Legacy Group, and I'll share a little bit more about who we are and what we do in a moment. I want to give you a little bit of context and background. So prior to starting the Leadership and Legacy Group, which was in 2013, I was a partner with Sandler Training, and we trained sales professionals and sales managers to improve their revenue numbers and to improve the culture in which we worked. I had a 14-year career with Procter & Gamble. I was a global consultant working in many different divisions across the company. And I had about half of my career in manufacturing management. So you can see my education there. I've got a master's in statistics from the University of Florida and a bachelor's in math from SUNY at Albany. And I'm originally from Poughkeepsie, New York. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Leadership and Legacy Group. So we work with business owners and senior leaders on the leadership side of succession and exit. And so really what we're all about is helping the owner develop a strong successor who can take over and run the company profitably and sustainably so that when the owner is ready to exit the business, he or she knows that they've got someone in place that can continue their legacy. We also work with business owners to enhance the strategic value of their business, helping them in case they want to sell the business to a third party. It helps them increase the likelihood that they'll get a higher valuation. We help them through some difficult decisions. As you probably know, when you are looking at a succession and exit, there are a lot of difficult decisions that need to be made, and it can get pretty emotional. And so we're that sounding board and that safe place for them to talk through and figure out exactly what they want to accomplish. And last, we work with a lot of business owners, as well as folks that are senior leaders in their company and are ready for their next chapter. They just may not know what it is, and they may not know how to get to that next chapter. So we'll work with them, helping them figure that out. As we get into today's content on personality tests, I want to be really clear on this legal disclaimer. So the content that I'm going to share with you today does not and is not intended to constitute any legal or HR advice. I'm sharing information with you that's for general purpose for you to learn from, and it may not be the most up-to-date legal, HR, or other information. So if you want to use any of what we talked about today, I strongly recommend that you talk to your attorney or your HR expert or both to get advice that's particular for your situation. So with that as a disclaimer, let's dive right into today's content. So I think every hiring party wants to do a good job and hire a candidate that's going to be well suited for the role that they're hiring for and the culture that matters most in that organization. And to do that, we've kind of got to move past some of our natural bias, and we've got to try to increase our own objectivity as we look to the best candidate to bring in. There's a lot of research that's been done that indicates that most of us tend to hire people that are like us. And it makes sense. You know, we tend to be more comfortable with people that look like us, that talk like us, that think like us, and that when we're in the hiring process, we tend to connect well with others that are like that. Now, if we layer on top of that all the uncertainty that's going on in our world right now between the pandemic and all the implications that that's had in our workplace, the economic impact, the concern over racial equity and EEOC requirements, And not to mention the recent political divisiveness. And I say recent only because we've just had an election, but political divisiveness has been going on for a really long time as well. And then many of us not only have moved to working from home, but we also have children who are schooling from home. And so the work that we're going to talk about today with hiring and using personality tests kind of sits on a platform of all of this uncertainty. And so we take that into account as we look at personality testing. And so let's talk about what personality is. So the definition of personality is the combination of characteristics or qualities that form an individual's distinctive character. So it's the things that make that person unique in terms of how they come across to others, how they're seen by others. So personality tests then are really measuring different aspects of somebody's individual and distinctive character. So you may be questioning, if you're here today, should you use those in hiring? And we're going to talk about whether you use them in hiring or not, and what are the implications of that, and whether you use them in retention. So let's start out with personality testing and hiring. Well, as I mentioned earlier, there are legal implications. And so again, I want to stress, confirm with your HR consultant or HR VP director and or an employment attorney before you go into this. So in hiring, employers are required to ensure that any test that they're using to help them select a candidate for a particular job are reliable and valid and will consistently provide data that predict success on the job. Okay, if not, then you're at risk of a discrimination claim. And so that's where the EEOC comes in. And I am not an expert on this, but I think it's important that anyone that's going to be using them understand what a reliable and valid assessment test is, and whether the choice of tests that you're using, if you choose to use them, meet these requirements and guidelines. Now, this paragraph that I pulled off that you can see in front of you came directly from SHRM.org. And SHRM is the Society for Human Resource Management. They are really a group of very, very qualified experts in the HR arena. And so if you have questions and you don't have access to a HR expert or consultant, or an employment attorney is not the right fit, then SHRM has resources that you can tap into. And if you're in North Carolina in either the Triad or in Raleigh, CAI, Capital Associated Industries, also offers HR consulting work that's very good as well. So I would point you in that direction if you have any questions about this. So my question on the hiring side is always, is it worth the risk? And there are risks associated, but it might be worth it. So there are a couple of different ways that I look at risk. One is, of course, the risk of violating EEOC guidelines and policies. But the other is the risk of hiring the wrong person, hiring someone that is not a right fit. And that's an expensive proposition. So according to SHRM, and I also found this as I was doing research at Harvard Business Review, personality assessments are among the least effective in predicting job performance. And in fact, they work best when they're combined with other assessments that predict or assess cognitive ability or integrity. So you can see at the bottom of the screen in front of you, there's a chart of the most effective hiring selection practices. And you can see that multi-measure tests, which are the ones that look at cognitive ability and integrity and personality interests in there, actually correlate very, very highly, 0.71, with the ability to select good candidates. But if you just look at personality tests alone, you'll see that at best, they only correlate at a 0.22, which is quite low. What's interesting and what I thought you might find to be useful information is what's lower than personality tests is job experience. Job experience only correlates 0.13, but most hiring parties pay particular attention to job experience. If you look at most people's resume is covered with information on job experience. And if the resume is strong, that's what gets people in the door. It may not be the only hiring practice that they use, but it's what gets people in the door. So you can see that there are a variety of other practices here that, and with varying degrees of validity and value. You can also see that reference checks are not particularly high. I think companies that do them kind of as a protection mechanism, and certainly there's nothing wrong with doing reference checks, but they don't correlate super high. So you may be looking at this and thinking, well, if the personality tests and the job experience and reference checks aren't very good, then what is good? And that's a really good question. There are some best practices that work very well. So let's talk a little bit about best practices. You'll see that I've got 8 of them listed here, and you may already do many of these, and I hope that you do. My favorite, and the one that I think is the most relevant and the most effective, is what's called behavioral-based interviews. And in behavioral-based interviews, what you're doing is you're identifying in advance what are the factors that are most important for this particular company. So it might have some cultural components, and for this particular role that you're hiring for. And you're asking, tell me about a time when, and then you're inserting the particular component that you're interested in learning more about. And then you close the question with, what did you do and how did it work out? So for example, if working well with others is very important in your culture and for this particular role, then a behavioral-based interview question might sound like, tell me about a time when you had to work well on a collaborative team. What did you do and how did it work out? If you are exploring, let's see, if one of the components that's important for this role description is attention to detail, you might make a behavioral-based question that would sound like, tell me about a time when you were working on a project where attention to detail was critically important. What did you do and how did it turn out? And in answering those questions, not only will you get examples of what the person has already done, which is far more valuable than a speculative question about what they might do, but it also gives you a wide range of acceptable responses, from highly sophisticated examples to very basic examples. And you will be able to then discern and decide where on that spectrum of sophisticated to basic is the right fit for the particular role you're hiring for. So those are behavioral-based interviews. I'm a big fan of giving an interviewee a sample project to do, something that they must bring to either the first interview or something that they bring to a second interview follow-up if you're committed to doing a second interview for a handful of people. Others include having a panel interview. And that can be a little bit unnerving, and maybe that's what you want to create, is a little bit of stress and tension there to see how your interviewee responds. I spent a day when I interviewed with Procter & Gamble, and it included a variety of interviews through that day, but it also included a little bit of shadowing. Others, as we mentioned, valid, reliable, and effective cognitive assessments. Those correlated higher than the personality assessments. Referrals and references, we talked about those as well. A lot of companies are looking at social media now, and there's some value in understanding what the person is posting and whether that's going to potentially be a great fit for your company or put you at risk. Background checks, companies will often do those, especially if the person is going to be handling money or confidential information or something like that. And then the last one I've got up here is the idea of hiring somebody as a temporary or creating a 90-day temporary to permanent hire option for them. And it gives them a chance to check you out, which isn't bad. And it gives you a chance to check them out while getting them on board. Of course, there's costs associated with this as you're training somebody to do a job that after 90 days, they or you might choose to part ways. But it can be a mechanism that is a best practice in some industries. So those are some examples of best practices if you're looking at creating a new hiring process or improving the one that you have. So I'd like to ask you, what adjustments in hiring best practices will you make your hiring process more robust? And I'm going to give you a couple minutes right now to think about that. If you're in a room with somebody that's watching this with you, then you can certainly talk about that. And I'm going to pause this for a little while to give you some time to reflect. And then, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do a debrief with you, but we'll come back together in a couple of minutes after you've had a chance to think through this and make any notes that would be relevant for your company. Okay, so I hope you've all had a chance to think through the hiring practice improvements that you might want to make based on our conversation today. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to shift into retention. Personality tests are far more popular for use within a regular role or within a company than my personal preference versus hiring. So I want to talk about all the different ways that you can use personality assessments within your company to retain the folks that work for you. So the first one I want to talk about is increasing self-awareness. One of the best things about a personality assessment is the insight that it can give each of us on better understanding ourselves. And so it gives us insight on how to understand ourselves, but it also gives us insight on how others see us, how others perceive us. And oftentimes we don't get a lot of great perspective on how we are seen by other people. And so the only way that we can get it is either by asking other people and trusting them to tell us the truth. And maybe we get some of that in a 360, or to take one of these personality assessments, and it will give us a report. And if we fill it out truthfully and we fill it out, reflecting on ourselves as best we can, then we can get some really valuable insight. I'm kind of a personality assessment junkie. I love taking them because I love to see what new insight I can get about myself, what nuances I can find that will be helpful for me as I think about the work that I do, or I think about the clients that I work with, or simply the network that I'm a part of. So increasing self-awareness is a really valuable tool. When we know ourselves better, we're better able to catch ourselves doing things that may or may not serve us, may or may not serve our company, and may have negative impact or positive impact on our team. So if it's a positive impact on the team and we know it because it came out through a personality assessment, wouldn't we like to do more of that? And if it has a negative impact on our team and we know it, wouldn't we like to choose to do less of it? So increasing self-awareness is one. Strengthening teams. Personalities on teams can, the team development model, let me start that way. The team development model, which you may be familiar with, it starts with form. You bring a team of people together, and then you go through a storm phase where, people's personal agendas come out and what they're trying to accomplish, and people are kind of feeling each other out and testing the waters. And then if your team is successful, you move into the norm phase, which is where you start working together much more productively. You start understanding the dynamics of each other's personality, the goals that each other has. And then ultimately, if you've got a really strong team, you hit a place of synergy, or perform. So it starts out with form, storm, norm, and perform. And the personality assessments can be a very powerful way to strengthen your team, because you can quickly understand where people are coming from based on what matters most to them. You can learn about their style and their preferences. You can learn about what makes them tick, what's going to irritate them, what's going to make them very happy. And if you understand that, then you can work within that much more effectively, and it can help you build a really strong team. Other uses for personality tests are to develop leaders. So in my work, where I'm developing leaders to prepare them to take over and run a company profitably and sustainably, having them understand the leadership aspects of their style is very important. And when they understand what leadership strengths they bring and where the opportunities are for improvement, then we can build a development plan to help them close any gaps that are there, or help them strengthen their leadership approach and style. And it helps the entire organization when a leader is more effective. We also can benefit greatly using personality assessments to enhance the culture. When I start working with a team, one of the things I like to do fairly early on, if they're open to it, is do a personality assessment for everyone on the team. And I work a lot with leadership teams. And when we do a personality assessment of a leadership team, and we can look at a grid or a matrix of where each person's style is on the leadership team, it enables us to not only get a good sense of how to strengthen the team, as I mentioned earlier, but it gives us really good insight into the culture of the organization, because often the leadership team is what drives the culture of the organization. And so if you have a leadership team that is very strong in certain personality characteristics, then your culture is going to likely be very strong in certain personality characteristics. So enhancing the culture is a great way to use personality assessments. The last one I have listed here is around embracing diversity. I think oftentimes we default to stereotypes, and what we find out with personality assessments is that the stereotypes don't reflect the different personality styles. And so we may be judging books by their cover instead of giving folks an opportunity to reveal their true personalities and leverage and capture those qualities and traits that are beneficial. We also are in a unique place in 2020 where we've got 4 generations in the workplace. In fact, the percent of millennials in the workplace this year is quite high. I can't remember, but it's over 25%. And so if you think about 4 generations in the workplace, our challenge is not just how to figure out how to work together across that age span, but each of those generations, each of those people in every generation bring different personality characteristics. And so each personality characteristic brings value to an organization. One is not better than another. All characteristics are beneficial in some way, shape, or form. And so the personality assessment can help us understand what each person brings, independent of whether they're a baby boomer, a millennial, a silent generation, or a Gen X. And so helping them understand themselves and then bring that value to the organization can be a huge asset and a wonderful tool for retaining, because you're building an incredibly strong culture and a workplace that really values everybody and everything that they bring. So retention is all about engaging people and developing people. I want to talk a little bit about something called Johari window. And the Johari window is a tool that helps you understand yourself better and understand what people see about you. And so if you look at this window, what you'll notice is that in the top left corner where it says open, those are characteristics that are known by you and known by others. So if you think about what you know about yourself, those characteristics that are known by you and known by others are things that, may be very straightforward and simple to understand. So for example, things that would fall into this category are, I have black hair, I wear glasses. That's known by you and it's known by me. You can see that. Other things that might be known by you and by others are likes that you have, hobbies and habits and things like that that other people see and you see in yourself. Okay, so that's that box. In the bottom left box where it says hidden, those are your secrets. Those are things that you know about yourself, but others don't know about you. So they might be things that you've never admitted to anybody else, maybe things that you've done, experiences that you've had. They could be wonderful experiences, things that you're particularly proud of, but you don't feel comfortable sharing with anyone else because you would feel like it was bragging. Or they could be things that for whatever reason are uncomfortable for you to share with anyone else. Okay, those fall in the hidden box of the Johari window. If you move to the right, the box that says unknown, those are things that you don't know about yourself and others don't know about you either. And I can't tell you what they are because I don't know and you don't know. In the top box where it says blind spot, that's yellow, those are things that are unknown to you, but they are known by others. So those are things that you're not aware that you're doing. Sometimes those are characteristics and qualities and traits that are strengths of yours taken to an extreme where they're no longer serving people well. Some of those things are characteristics that others recognize about you, but you've not been exposed to them before. So in a process of personality testing, the idea is that your report and the feedback that you get through going through the personality testing process will start to make your blind spots no longer blind. So in doing that, it helps you not only understand yourself better, but it helps you understand what other people see in you. And sometimes we can be delighted by what other people see in us. And if we knew it, we could leverage it better. That's the plus side of the blind spot. Oftentimes we think about the blind spot as the negative side, which is also often a challenge where we don't realize that what we're doing is not received very well or is causing harm or pain or hurt in the workplace. And so by becoming aware of it, it gives us the opportunity to actually do something about it. So you are probably wondering right now, like, what type am I and what type do I work with? And I'd like you, as we go through this next part of the session, I'd like for you to think about what type you are as I describe some of these styles to you, and think about the people that you work with and what type you think they might be. Because if we understand those types, then we can do things to work more effectively with them. So we talked about the importance of developing leaders, strengthening teams, enhancing culture, and embracing diversity as factors around retention. So I'd like you to think about, how do you do your best work? What are the characteristics that are in place for you when you get to do your absolute best work? So when you do your best work, are you in an environment where you have the quiet time to be able to think and plan? Or do you do your best work when you're in an environment where there's a lot going on and feels a little chaotic, but there's a lot of energy? Do you do your best work when you have a lot of details that you can work through and organize and sort? Or do you do your best work when you can stay kind of at the 30,000 foot level and think more strategically and big picture? Those are the kinds of things that I'm asking for here. And then the second thing I'd like you to consider is, what do you need from the people that you work with? So if you're thinking about your colleagues on a team, what do you need from them? Do you need the detailed information? Do you need to feel a part of the team? Do you need for people to get along better or well? When you think about what you need from your boss, do you need a boss that gives you a lot of latitude and a lot of freedom to go out and figure things out and make things happen and make decisions? Or do you need a boss that's going to, accept the conversation, the detailed conversation, and help you think through to make decisions together? So there's a whole lot of things that we could look at in terms of what you might need from the people that you work with and how you do your best work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how personality assessments fit. Again, we said that they look at preferences, okay? So look at your kind of go-to patterns. And we're going to talk about what some of those look like. So when you identify go-to patterns, we're thinking about behaviors and actions. We're thinking about, what you're seeing people do. We're thinking about the language that you use, your nonverbal body language and your verbal language, the choice of words that you use. So if you're thinking, if your language includes things like, I hear ya, versus I see what you mean. That gives some clues to your personality type. If your body language is like this versus like this, that gives some clues to your personality type as well. Go-to patterns can also show up in your wants and needs. We asked some questions of you just a couple of minutes ago along these lines. Also, how do you think? You know, what are the ways that you think? Are you a logical thinker? Are you a systemic thinker? Are you a big picture thinker? And then again, how do you do your best work? What's the struggle for you or for the people that you work with? When we think about what we struggle with, it can give us some clues into our personality as well. You know, if you struggle with walking into a room full of strangers, that tells me something about your personality. But if you stride into a room as though you own the place, then that tells me something very different. What do people find, you know, what do the people you work with find irritating? If they find it irritating when you tell a story instead of sharing the facts, that tells me something about their personality. If they find it irritating, if you're trying to get to business right away, you know, you start the meeting with, all right, let's get to work, rather than a little bit of chit chat about what you did this weekend or who won the football game that you were rooting for. Likewise, what engages them? That can tell me a lot about your personality. If you're engaged by talking to a team of people, doing a presentation, that tells me a lot. If you're engaged being by yourself and being able to read or maybe do some journaling, maybe work on a project by yourself, that can tell me a lot. And then the last two questions, what makes working with someone else great for you? What do you love about working with the people that you most enjoy working with? Those are some personality characteristics. And then what makes working with them really difficult for you? Maybe working with somebody else really difficult for you, challenging for you. So those are some questions that help you start to identify what are the different personality characteristics that would be helpful to know and understand as you're working with your boss, as you're working with your colleagues on a team, and as you're working with your own direct reports. So there are a number of different popular personality assessments. The most popular that I'm aware of are the three that I've got listed here. One is called the Big Five, and the Big Five model measures conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, and extroversion. You may or may not be familiar with that, but it's gotten pretty popular in the last several years. The Myers-Briggs, MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, that's been around since World War II. It was actually created by a mother-daughter team. And it measures introversion, extroversion. It measures whether you're a big picture thinker or you tend to be more detail-oriented and sequential in your thinking. It measures whether you're a thinker or a feeler, and it measures whether you know how you perceive the world around you, whether you like to try to control it as a judger, and it's not meaning a judgmental person, but it's more of like controlling the world around you, or whether you like to engage more and allow the world around you to unfold and influence you. They call that a perceiver. So those are the kinds of things that Myers-Briggs measures. And then the third one is the DISC profile. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the DISC profile today just to give you a taste of personality tests and what they measure. So here's the DISC profile. You can see that there are 4 types here, the DISC. And I'm not going to walk through each of these with you, but you can see here that the The D is for dominance. And so these are the hard charging, driven leaders. Typically, because they want to be in charge. Sometimes even if they're not, they want to be in charge. And the way that they're successful is that they take decisive action towards their goals. They're very action oriented. They're not afraid of a challenge. They're not afraid to confront. They can make the tough decisions, and they're very comfortable making them. In fact, they want to make them. We're going to go into a little bit more detail shortly. The I, it stands for influence, and these folks achieve success by persuading others to work with them towards their goals. So they're very people-oriented. They're always available to others, and they tend to be very inspiring leaders. They like to make other people feel good with praise and positive attitude. The S's, we call them steady stabilizers is what I call them. And the way that they achieve success is working as a part of a team. They really love being on a collaborative team. They love harmony. They are quickly trusted by other team members. They're a good team player. And they tend to be fairly methodical in terms of how they do their work. The last one is the C. The word here is conscientiousness. These folks are, the way that they achieve success is that they do their best work when there are very clear rules, very clear processes and systems in place, and they can follow those rules and stick to the process. They tend to be very thorough. They tend to be very conscientious, diplomatic, and fair, because they follow the rules. So that's an overview, and you can see that these four types are very different. I'm going to spend just a minute on each of these types. So if you look at the dominant, I mentioned that they are decisive and taking clear action towards a goal. The D's like to embrace a challenge. They want to be in charge. They want to be in control. They take action and they love getting results. They want to win. So they're comfortable making quick decisions. They're comfortable being fast-paced, and they're very confident. They can be very direct. I joke around that they can leave dead bodies all over the place if they aren't careful, because they have no problem being very direct and at times even forceful. The limitations of a D is that they can be impatient, skeptical, and they can be overbearing. In their quest to win, they can just run people over. So if you're thinking about the folks that you work with, how do you engage them? How do you connect with them in ways that are meaningful to them and enable you to work well with them? Okay. The next type is the I, again, for influence. And so these folks are really good at persuading others. A lot of salespeople, a lot of I's like the idea of sales. That's a better way of putting it. Any type can be very successful in sales. I's love selling because they love influencing and persuading others. They like to be the center of attention. If you go to a party, what you'll probably find is that the I's are the ones that are, in the middle of the circle of other people, and they're usually enthusiastic and uproarious and loud and talkative. They can be impulsive. Sometimes you can tell an I when they say something and you out loud to you or to a group, and you think to yourself, I can't believe that she just said that. Oh my goodness. Because they can be pretty emotional and pretty spontaneous. They tend to make a very good impression. They're likable people. Because they're inspiring, they're entertaining, they're motivating. People like to be around them. They tend to be pretty trusting. And so, the risk of an I is that they can be all over the place at times. They're kind of like, ooh, squirrel. They can run down rabbit holes and get excited about different things and maybe not complete the piece of work that they're working on because they're already on to the next thing. Let's talk about how do you engage them. So you've got to think about what's going to be attractive to a high I. Okay, the next one is steadiness. So as we talked about earlier, these folks like to work in harmony with others. They love to be a part of a team. They generally are very loyal. They're positive. They got a positive attitude. They can be steady, stable, practical, grounded, patient people. They are good at keeping the peace because they love harmony so much. And they've got the skills oftentimes to help people come together. They're agreeable, they're consistent. S's can sometimes struggle because they're not aware of what they want and need. They identify so well with so many other people that they can lose track of what is important to them. So if you're working with an S, you may want to check in and make sure that they have a moment to think about what matters most to them. They tend to be a very good listener. And as I said earlier, they're really quickly trusted. They are very helpful people. S's do see the big picture and they can see all the steps that it takes to get to that big picture. So they can be really good planners. An S, however, will really struggle with change. They need to know and connect with what the future is going to be. And then they need some time to process what that change is. If you spring a change on an S, it will really be difficult for them and they will likely withdraw. Now you spring a change on an I, high I, they're like, woohoo, yay. But that's not the case with S's. So if you look at the folks that you work with, you may find that in fact, the folks that are struggling with change the most are the S's, and you may need to give them a little bit of extra space. All right, so conscientiousness, that's the last one. And as we described, the conscientious C likes to get quality outcomes. They do it by working very conscientiously within the rules, using systems, processes, and procedures. These folks tend to be very comfortable in a highly regulated environment, government structure, something like that, because they know what's expected and they work within the rules. They're very comfortable with authority. These folks are also very analytical. They're very data-based. If you challenge a C on their data, you better be sure you're right because they will likely have invested a tremendous amount of their focus, making sure that they are delivering something that is accurate and correct. They are systematic and they tend to be detail-oriented. They can be creative problem solvers because they can dig into those details and they're always looking for the root cause. What caused the problem that we're having? They are diplomatic. They're very cautious. So if you're working with someone that's a C, you may need to build in some extra time for decision making. They tend to have a very long process to making a decision. They have high standards for themselves and they have high standards for others. They expect a lot. Their approach to conflict can be indirect. And what I mean by that is that high C's can be passive aggressive. So they're not going to be as likely, of course, these are all, generalities, but high C's are not going to be as likely to directly address a conflict. A D will address it directly, but a high C will be indirect and possibly show up as passive aggressive. The other thing about high Cs is that they may miss the big picture or the next steps in a process because they're so focused on the details in front of them and making sure that they're right. So the big question then is, what disc profile best matches you and what types are on your leadership team? So I'm going to give you a minute now to think about that, and then we're going to come back. All right, so I hope that you have figured out what type on the DISC profile you likely are. And for those people on your leadership team, it's so much better if you have an understanding of why they do what they do. When you notice the behaviors, those characteristics that we talked about earlier, and now you can understand why they do what they do, maybe a little bit better. So when you think about using personality tests, whether it's in hiring or retaining your staff, the takeaway message that I want you to think about is that it's all about your ROI. And if your ROI says that this is a good investment, and what you probably have figured out is that I believe it's a good investment for retention. I think that it can be a worthwhile investment for hiring if it's paired with a variety of other best practices, and if it is within the legal realm for your particular situation. But the point is that it's most important to be very intentional about what you're doing. And if I did not say this earlier, I will add that personality assessments are not intended to put people in a box. They're intended to talk about characteristics that help us understand each other better. So if you would like to follow up with me with any questions that you have, my contact information is here. My email address is abby@leadershiplegacygroup.com. My phone number is 336-458-9939. And I have a weekly leadership tip that comes out via email. And I would love to add you to my list. It's a short tip. It's about 60 seconds or less to read. And there may be some other, a few other things in my newsletter, but that's really the gist of the newsletter. So I invite you to send me an email and I will put you on my newsletter list. You can unsubscribe at any time. There's a button at the bottom, like in most newsletters, to unsubscribe. And I do have some free resources on my website. So if you go to my website, www.leadershiplegacygroup.com, you'll see a tab for free resources, and you can see a variety of things from, resume writing to how do you develop your leaders for succession, variety of different things. So thank you so much for being with me today, and thank you for participating in the NCACPA conference. I wish you much success as you continue the conference and take all your learnings back.